The ceremonial torches burned low, their flames struggling against the damp mountain air that rolled through the valley like a living thing. 300 wolves stood in perfect silence beneath the blood moon, their breath visible in silver clouds, their eyes fixed on the stone altar where Sarah Valdrin knelt in white. She had never wanted this. The dress they'd forced her into was heavy with embroidered silver thread, symbols she didn't understand, words in a language that made her throat close when she tried to read them. Her knees ached against the cold granite. Her hands trembled where they rested on her thighs, palms up, as tradition demanded. Offering posture, her soon-to-be mate had called it when he'd rehearsed the ceremony with her last night. You're offering yourself to the pack. To me. Show them you're grateful. Grateful. She almost laughed. Almost. Instead, she kept her eyes fixed on the ground and tried to remember how to breathe. Councilman Aldrich Thorne stood before her, his ceremonial robes pristine, his salt and pepper hair gleaming beneath the torchlight. He was reciting the bonding rites in the old tongue, words that rumbled through the clearing like distant thunder, words that would bind her to Victor Ashworth for eternity. Victor stood to her left, close enough that she could smell the bergamot in his cologne, the whiskey he'd drunk to calm his nerves. His hand rested on her shoulder, heavy and possessive. Property, that hand said. Mine. She had been sold to the Ashworth pack 3 months ago, a peace treaty sealed in her blood. The Valdrin pack had been dying, hunted by rogues, decimated by a curse no healer could break. Her father had made the deal in desperation, his only daughter in exchange for protection, resources, alliance. Victor had seemed kind at first, attentive. He'd brought her flowers and spoke of the future they would build together. The mask had slipped 2 weeks in. Now she knew the truth of him, the cruelty that lived behind his smile, the rage that surfaced whenever she failed to perform adequately as his future Luna. She'd learned to walk quietly, speak softly, make herself small. But tonight, something felt different. The air itself seemed to hum with tension, as though the mountain was holding its breath. The wolves in attendance shifted restlessly, their eyes darting toward the eastern ridge where the tree line met the sky. Sarah followed their gazes, and her heart stopped. A figure stood at the edge of the clearing, impossibly still, draped in shadow despite the moonlight that bathed everything else in silver. She couldn't make out his features, only the outline of broad shoulders, the suggestion of height and power that made something ancient and terrified stir in her chest. Who? Sarah. Victor's voice cut through her thoughts, sharp with irritation. The councilman asked you a question. She blinked, turning back to find Aldrich watching her with barely concealed impatience. Do you accept this bond freely? He repeated. Do you offer your blood, your wolf, your spirit to the Ashworth pack? Her wolf. That was the cruelest part. She didn't have one. She was human, entirely devastatingly human, born to a shifter bloodline, but denied the gift that should have been her birthright. A genetic anomaly, the healers had called it. A disappointment, her mother had whispered when she thought Sarah couldn't hear. Victor wanted to mate her anyway. A human Luna was weak, yes, but controllable. Moldable. She would never challenge him, never threaten his authority. She was perfect. She was a prisoner. The words stuck in her throat. Yes. 1 syllable. 2 letters. They would end her life as surely as a blade. But what choice did she have? She started. She hesitates. The voice came from the eastern ridge, deep and cold as glacier water, and it silenced every breath in the clearing. The shadowed figure moved. No, he materialized, one moment at the tree line and the next standing 10 feet from the altar, as though the space between had simply ceased to exist. The torchlight finally caught his features, and Sarah felt the world tilt beneath her. He was beautiful in the way a storm was beautiful, terrible, inevitable, something you survived rather than admired. Dark hair fell across a face carved from angles and shadows, cheekbones sharp enough to cut, a jaw set in granite resolve. His eyes were the pale gray of winter dawn, and they were fixed on Victor with an expression that made Sarah's blood run cold. She knew who he was. Everyone did. Kalen Voss, the Alpha King. He ruled the 7 territories from his fortress in the northern mountains, a legend more than a man, spoken of in whispers and warnings. He hadn't attended a pack ceremony in over a decade. He didn't need to. His word was law, his presence unnecessary. And yet here he stood. She hesitates, he repeated, his voice carrying without effort. And you did not think to pause, Councilman. Aldrich's face drained of color. Alpha King, the ceremony is sacred. We did not expect. Clearly. Victor's hand tightened on Sarah's shoulder, fingers digging into bone. She flinched, a small, involuntary sound escaping her lips. Kalen's gaze shifted, found her. Held. Something happened in that moment. Something Sarah couldn't name. The air between them seemed to crystallize, sharp and electric, and she felt it everywhere, in her chest, her throat, the base of her spine. It was like being seen for the first time in her entire life, like being stripped raw and somehow still standing. His nostrils flared, his jaw clenched, and then Victor was hauling her upright, spinning her to face him, his hand cracking across her cheek before she could even register the movement. The sound echoed like a gunshot. You will not embarrass me, Victor hissed, his face inches from hers, spittle flecking her skin. You will say yes. You will... He never finished the sentence. A growl split the silence, deep, primal, ancient, and Sarah watched as Victor's eyes went wide with terror. She turned, slowly, her cheek still burning. Kalen Voss had changed. His eyes were no longer gray. They were black, solid, endless black, and shadows curled around his form like living things, like hungry things, as his voice dropped to something that barely sounded human. Do that again. He took one step forward. The ground trembled. I dare you. Nobody moved. 300 wolves stood frozen beneath the blood moon, their instincts screaming at them to submit, to kneel, to bare their throats to the power radiating from the Alpha King like heat from a wildfire. Even the torches seemed to dim, their flames cowering away from the darkness that pooled around Kalen Voss. Sarah couldn't breathe. Her cheek throbbed where Victor had struck her, but the pain felt distant now, a faraway thing compared to the terrible, magnetic pull of the man standing before them. His black eyes hadn't shifted back to gray. They remained endless voids, fixed on Victor with a predator's patience. Victor released her shoulder. She stumbled, catching herself on the altar's edge, her white dress dragging through the ceremonial ash scattered across the stone. Her hands were shaking. Her entire body was shaking. Alpha King! Victor's voice cracked on the title. He was trying to sound respectful, controlled, but Sarah could smell his fear, sharp and sour beneath his cologne. This is a private ceremony. Pack matters. Surely you understand? I understand, Kalen said, and the shadows around him pulsed. That you struck an unmated female at a bonding altar. The words fell like stones into still water. Unmated. Sarah's hand flew to her throat where the ceremonial collar rested, silver and sapphire, Victor's claim made visible. But the bond hadn't been completed. The blood hadn't been exchanged. In the eyes of Wolflaw, she belonged to no one, which meant Victor had just committed an offense punishable by death. She's mine. Victor's composure fractured. The treaty? Treaties can be broken. Kalen moved again, that impossible gliding motion that ate distance without seeming to cross it. He was closer now, close enough that Sarah could see the dark veins crawling beneath the skin of his throat. The way his hands had elongated into something between human and wolf, claws gleaming black as obsidian. He wasn't fully shifting. He was holding the beast back. Barely. Alpha King, please, Aldrich stepped forward, hands raised in supplication. The Valdrin pack is under our protection. This female was given willingly. Was she? The question hung in the air. Slowly, terribly, Kaylin's gaze shifted from Victor to Sarah. Those black eyes found hers, and she felt the impact like a physical blow, something slamming into her chest, cracking open a door she hadn't known existed. Mate. The word surfaced from somewhere deep and primal, somewhere she didn't recognize. It made no sense. She was human. She didn't have a wolf. She couldn't sense bonds or recognize destinies written in blood and moonlight. And yet, mate. Mine. His. Little human. His voice dropped, the growl fading into something almost soft, almost gentle. Did you choose this? She should lie. She knew she should lie. Victor's pack surrounded her, and her father's survival depended on this alliance, and she had spent her entire life learning to say what was expected, to perform the role assigned to her. But those black eyes wouldn't let her. No. The word escaped like a confession. No, I didn't choose this. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Victor lunged. He didn't shift. There wasn't time, but his fist was already swinging toward her face, and Sarah saw it coming with a strange, crystalline clarity. She saw his fury, his humiliation, his need to silence her before she could say anything else. She didn't see Kaylin move. One moment Victor was reaching for her. The next he was suspended in the air, Kaylin's hand wrapped around his throat, claws pricking the skin until blood welled in thin crimson lines. I gave you a warning. Kaylin's voice was ice and darkness. You didn't listen. Victor's legs kicked uselessly. His face purpled. His pack shifted restlessly, caught between the instinct to protect their future alpha and the absolute certainty that challenging the king meant death. Sarah stood paralyzed. She should feel relieved, vindicated. Victor had tormented her for months. The bruises on her ribs hadn't faded from last week's correction, and the cigarette burn on her inner arm still wept beneath its bandage. But all she felt was hollow terror, because Kaylin Voss wasn't saving her. He was claiming her. She could see it in the possessive curl of his lip, the way his body had positioned itself between her and every other wolf in the clearing. One cage for another. Please. The word scraped from her throat. Please don't kill him. Kaylin's head turned. A fraction. Just enough to catch her in his peripheral vision. Why? Because... She swallowed. Because if you do, his pack will blame mine. My father. My little brother. They'll punish them for my failure. Something flickered in those endless black depths. Recognition, perhaps. Or surprise. He released Victor. The younger wolf crumpled, gasping, hands clawing at his bruised throat. His pack rushed forward to collect him, keeping their eyes averted from the Alpha King. The treaty is void. Kaylin's voice carried across the clearing like a death knell. This female is under my protection now. Any wolf who touches her answers to me. Murmurs erupted, shocked, furious, disbelieving. Sarah felt the ground sway beneath her. She started. But Kaylin was already turning, already walking toward the eastern ridge, and without thinking, without permission, her feet began to follow. Little human. He didn't look back. Can you keep up? She couldn't. She knew she couldn't. But the alternative was staying here, facing Victor's fury, becoming a target for an entire pack's humiliation. She gathered her ruined white dress in her hands, and she ran. The forest devoured them whole. Sarah's lungs burned as she stumbled through undergrowth that clawed at her ceremonial dress, shredding the delicate fabric into ribbons of white that caught on branches like surrendered flags. The blood moon filtered through the canopy in fractured beams, painting everything in shades of rust and shadow. Kaylin moved ahead of her like smoke, silent, fluid, barely disturbing the fallen leaves beneath his boots. He hadn't spoken since they'd left the clearing, hadn't looked back to check if she was following. But he'd slowed his pace. She noticed that, despite the impossible grace of his movement, despite the power that radiated from him like heat from a forge, he was walking at a speed her human legs could match. Barely. The fog thickened as they climbed higher into the mountains. It wrapped around her ankles, her waist, her throat, cold and wet and heavy with the scent of pine and something else. Something ancient. "Where are you taking me?" Her voice came out ragged, breathless. He didn't answer. "I asked you a question." Kaylin stopped. The suddenness of it made her stumble, and she caught herself against a tree trunk, bark scraping her palms. He turned, slowly, deliberately, and the moonlight caught his features in sharp relief. His eyes had faded from black to gray again, but they still held something wild, something barely contained. "You ran from your pack." His voice was flat. "You followed me into the dark without knowing where I was leading you. And now you demand answers?" Heat flooded her cheeks. "I didn't have a choice." "Everyone has a choice." Easy to say when you're not the one being sold. The words hung between them, sharp and bitter. Sarah waited for his anger. Victor had taught her to expect rage when she spoke out of turn. Her body tensed automatically, bracing for impact. But Kaylin simply studied her. "You're afraid of me," he observed. "I'm afraid of everyone." Something shifted in his expression. A crack in the granite, there and gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "The fortress is an hour's walk." He turned away again. "There's a cabin halfway. You can rest there." He started moving before she could respond. Sarah pushed off from the tree and followed, her mind racing. The Alpha King had interrupted her mating ceremony, nearly killed her fiancé, claimed her under his protection, and now he was offering her a place to rest? None of it made sense. The fog grew denser as they walked, until Sarah could barely see 3 feet ahead. She kept her eyes fixed on Kaylin's broad shoulders, using him as her compass through the endless gray. "Why did you come tonight?" The question escaped before she could stop it. His stride didn't falter. "I was summoned." "By who? By what?" A pause. "The blood moon calls all wolves to witness significant bonds. I felt a pull from 50 miles away." "But you haven't attended a ceremony in years. Everyone says many things about me." His voice hardened. "Most of them lies. The rest exaggerations." "And the shadows? The black eyes?" This time he did stop. When he faced her, his expression was unreadable. "You ask dangerous questions, little human. I need to understand what I'm walking into." "You're walking into survival. Isn't that enough?" No, it wasn't, but the set of his jaw told her she wouldn't get more tonight. The cabin emerged from the fog like a forgotten memory, small, wooden, its windows dark, but its chimney intact. Kaylin approached the door and pressed his palm flat against the weathered wood. Something clicked. The door swung open. Inside was sparse but clean. A narrow bed covered in furs. A fireplace stacked with dry wood. A table with 2 chairs. The air smelled of cedar and dust. "Rest." Kaylin stepped aside to let her enter. "I'll keep watch." "You're not coming inside?" "I don't sleep." The admission was strange enough to stop her at the threshold. She turned, studying his face in the darkness. "Everyone sleeps. Not everyone carries what I carry." There it was again, that flicker of something beneath the cold exterior. Pain, maybe. Or exhaustion so deep it had become permanent. "The curse," she whispered. His eyes snapped to hers. "What do you know of curses?" "Nothing, just..." She hesitated. "There are rumors. About the Voss bloodline. About what happens to anyone who gets close to you." For a long moment, he said nothing. The fog curled around his feet, and the moonlight caught the sharp planes of his face, and Sarah felt that pull again, that inexplicable gravity drawing her toward him despite every instinct screaming danger. "The rumors are true." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. Everyone I have ever cared for has died. Violently. Painfully. Because of me. Her heart clenched. Then why did you save me? He looked at her then, really looked, and she saw something raw beneath the ice. Something hungry and desperate and achingly lonely. Because when I looked at you, he said slowly, the curse went quiet. For the first time in 200 years, everything went quiet. The words hit her like a physical force. Before she could respond, he stepped back into the fog. Sleep, little human. Tomorrow we reach the fortress, and nothing will be quiet again. He vanished into the gray. Sarah stood in the doorway for a long time, her hand pressed to her chest where her heart beat wild and confused. She didn't have a wolf. She couldn't sense bonds. But something inside her recognized him anyway. And that terrified her more than anything. Dawn broke gray and cold over the mountains. Sarah hadn't slept. She'd tried, curled beneath the furs on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling while the fire crackled low. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw Victor's fist swinging toward her face. Saw Kalen's black eyes. Heard his voice echoing through her skull. Everything went quiet. What did that mean? How could she, a human without a wolf, without power, without anything, silence a 200-year-old curse? The door opened without warning. Sarah bolted upright, heart hammering, but it wasn't Kalen who entered. It was a woman, tall, willowy, with silver hair cropped close to her skull and eyes the color of burnt amber. She carried a bundle of clothing in her arms. The king sent these. Her voice was cool, professional. Your dress is ruined. Sarah glanced down at the shredded ceremonial gown, now gray with dirt and torn beyond repair. Thank you. The woman set the clothing on the table. Dark wool pants, a cream sweater, leather boots lined with fur. I'm Marin. She didn't offer her hand. Captain of the King's Guard. I'll escort you to the fortress when you're ready. Where is he? The king doesn't explain his movements to me. Marin's gaze swept over Sarah with barely concealed assessment. You're smaller than I expected. Expected? The prophecy speaks of an outsider who will break the Voss curse. I assumed she would be... Marin paused. More. The words stung more than they should have. I don't know anything about a prophecy. No. Marin moved toward the door. I don't suppose you would. She left without another word. Sarah dressed quickly, grateful for the warmth of the wool against her skin. The boots fit perfectly. How had they known her size? And the sweater was soft, expensive, carrying a faint scent of cedar. His scent. She shook off the thought and stepped outside. The fog had lifted, revealing a landscape that stole her breath. They were high in the mountains now, surrounded by ancient pines dusted with frost. Below, a valley stretched silver and gold in the early light, and at its center rose the fortress. It was massive. Carved from black stone that seemed to absorb the sunlight rather than reflect it, its towers climbed toward the sky like grasping fingers. Banners bearing the Voss crest, a wolf swallowing the moon, snapped in the wind. Marin waited on the path, her posture rigid. The fortress has stood for 800 years, she said as Sarah approached. Built by the first Alpha King after the Great War. Every stone was laid by wolf hands. It's beautiful. It's a prison. Marin began walking. Every king has died within its walls. The curse makes sure of that. They descended into the valley in silence. The fortress gates opened as they approached, massive iron doors that groaned with age and weight. Inside, the stone corridors stretched endlessly, lit by torches that burned with blue flame. Wolves watched from the shadows. Sarah felt their eyes tracking her movement, their whispers following her like ghosts. Human. Weak. Why is she here? Marin led her through a maze of hallways until they reached a door carved with symbols Sarah didn't recognize. The captain pushed it open. Your quarters. The king will send for you when he's ready. When will that be? When he decides. The door closed behind her. Sarah stood alone in the chamber, trying to absorb her surroundings. The room was larger than her entire family home. A canopied bed draped in midnight silk. A fireplace already crackling with warmth. Tall windows overlooking the valley below. And books. Hundreds of them, lining every wall, stacked on tables, piled beside chairs. She moved toward the nearest shelf, fingers trailing over cracked leather spines. The titles were written in languages she couldn't read. But one word appeared again and again. Voss. She pulled a volume free and opened it carefully. The pages were yellowed, fragile, covered in handwritten script. She couldn't understand the words, but the illustrations needed no translation. A wolf wrapped in shadow. A woman standing in light. And between them, a thread, thin and golden, connecting their hearts. The prophecy. Sarah spun. Kaelin stood in the doorway she hadn't heard open. He'd changed from the dark clothes of last night into something simpler. Gray linen shirt, black pants, bare feet. Without the shadows curling around him, he looked almost human. Almost. You move quietly, she managed. You were distracted. He crossed the room and took the book from her hands, studying the illustration with an expression she couldn't read. This was written 400 years ago by a seer who went mad trying to understand the curse. What does it say? That a woman without a wolf will silence the darkness. His jaw tightened. That she will either save the Voss bloodline or destroy it completely. And you think that woman is me? He set the book down carefully. I think, he said slowly, that when I saw you kneeling at that altar, something in my chest recognized you. Something older than memory. Deeper than instinct. Her throat constricted. I'm nobody. A failed wolf. A treaty bride. You're not nobody. He stepped closer, and she felt the heat radiating from his skin, the power thrumming beneath his surface. You're the first person in 2 centuries who hasn't flinched from my shadows. She had flinched. She knew she had, but she hadn't run. I'm still afraid of you, she whispered. Good. His gray eyes held hers. You should be. 3 days passed in strange suspension. Sarah explored the fortress in careful increments, mapping its corridors like a prisoner planning escape. The wolves who lived within its walls watched her constantly, some with curiosity, others with open hostility. But none approached. Maren had made it clear that the king's protection extended to every corner of his domain. Touching her meant death. She should have felt safe. Instead, she felt like a butterfly pinned beneath glass. Kaelin appeared unpredictably. She would turn a corner and find him standing in shadow, gray eyes tracking her movement. He never spoke during these encounters, just watched, as though memorizing her face, then vanished before she could form words. It was maddening. On the 4th morning, she discovered the garden. It sat in the fortress's eastern courtyard, surrounded by high stone walls that blocked the worst of the mountain wind. Once, it must have been beautiful. She could see the bones of it beneath the decay. Flower beds carved in elegant spirals. A fountain at the center, now dry and cracked. Benches positioned for conversation beneath trees that had long since died. Everything was gray, brown, lifeless. Sarah knelt beside a withered rose bush, touching its brittle branches. My mother planted those. She startled at his voice. Kaelin stood at the garden's entrance, arms crossed, expression unreadable. They're dead, she said quietly. Everything in this garden dies. He moved closer, his footsteps silent on the frozen ground. The curse poisons the soil. Anything that tries to grow withers within days. That's horrible. That's reality. He stopped beside her, staring at the dead roses with something that looked almost like grief. She loved this place, he continued. Spent hours here, trying to coax life from the earth. She believed that if she could make something beautiful survive, the curse could be broken. What happened to her? His jaw clenched. She died, like everyone else. The flatness of his voice cut deeper than any emotion could have. This was a wound scarred over so many times it had become numb. How old were you? 12. He turned away. Old enough to understand, young enough to believe I could stop it. Sarah rose slowly, brushing dirt from her knees. The curse kills everyone you care about. Is that why you keep your distance? Why you watch me from shadows instead of speaking? I'm speaking now. Only because I found this place. She gestured at the dead garden. Only because I stumbled into your grief. Something flickered across his face. You see too much, little human. Maybe. She stepped closer, close enough to see the faint lines around his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. Or maybe you're tired of hiding. For a moment, she thought he would retreat. The shadows at the garden's edges stirred, responding to his agitation. Then his hand lifted. His fingers hovered near her face, not touching, never touching, but close enough that she felt the heat of his skin. He traced the air along her cheekbone where Victor's handprint had finally faded. I wanted to kill him. His voice dropped to gravel. When he struck you, I wanted to tear his throat out with my teeth. I wanted to bathe in his blood and howl his death to the moon. Her breath caught. Why didn't you? Because you asked me not to. His hand dropped. Because for some reason I cannot explain, your voice reached through 200 years of rage and made me stop. The confession hung between them, heavy and raw. Is that the bond? She whispered. The mate thing? I don't know. He stepped back, creating distance. I've never felt it before. I was supposed to be exempt. The curse ensures no mate survives long enough to complete a bond. But you? I'm human. Maybe the rules are different. Maybe. His gray eyes searched her face. Or maybe the curse is simply waiting, letting me hope before it destroys everything again. The bitterness in his voice made her chest ache. Kaelin. It was the first time she'd used his name. He went still, shadows freezing mid-curl around his feet. Whatever this is between us, she said carefully, I didn't choose it. I don't understand it. But I'm not going to spend my time here hiding from it either. You should hide. His voice hardened. You should run as far as your human legs can carry you. Where would I go? Victor wants me dead. My father sold me. The only person who's shown me any protection is you. I'm not protection. I'm a death sentence. Then teach me. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. Teach me about the curse, about the prophecy. Let me understand what I'm facing instead of cowering in ignorance. He stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he extended his hand. Come with me. She took it. His fingers closed around hers, warm, calloused, impossibly gentle for hands that had killed, and the contact sent electricity racing up her arm. The shadows at his feet recoiled, retreating into the garden's corners as though burned. His eyes widened. What? She tried to pull back, but he held firm. What is it? The shadows. His voice was strange, distant. They're afraid of you. Sarah looked down at their joined hands, at the darkness that writhed away from her touch. She didn't have a wolf. She didn't have power. But something inside her was waking up, and for the first time since the mating ceremony, Sarah wondered if she wasn't the victim of this story after all. Kaelin led her beneath the fortress. They descended through passages that grew older with each step, polished stone giving way to rough-hewn rock, modern torches replaced by ancient sconces that flickered with that strange blue flame. The air grew cold, then colder still, until Sarah's breath misted before her face. Their hands remained joined. Neither acknowledged it. Neither let go. Where are we going? Her voice echoed off the narrow walls. The crypt of the first Alpha King. Kaelin's grip tightened slightly. Where the curse began. The passage opened into a vast underground chamber. Sarah stopped, her breath catching. The space was enormous, carved directly from the mountain's heart, its ceiling lost in darkness above. Stone pillars rose like frozen trees, covered in symbols that pulsed with faint silver light. At the chamber's center stood a sarcophagus of black marble, and behind it, stretching across the entire back wall, was a carving. A wolf. Massive, terrible. Its jaws open in an eternal howl. Its eyes were empty sockets, but something moved within them. Shadow. Darkness. Something alive and watching. Fenrir. Kaelin spoke the name like a curse. The first wolf. The father of our kind. A god? A monster. He released her hand and moved toward the sarcophagus. 800 years ago, my ancestor made a deal with him. Power beyond imagining in exchange for a price paid in blood. Sarah approached slowly, her eyes fixed on the carving. The wolf's gaze seemed to follow her. What price? Love. Kaelin's voice hollowed. Fenrir demanded that every alpha king of the Voss bloodline would watch their loved ones die. Parents, siblings, children, mates. Anyone the king's heart attached to would be claimed by Shadow. The horror of it settled over her like a shroud. Why would anyone agree to that? Because my ancestor was arrogant. He believed he could outsmart a god, love no one, protect everyone. He was wrong. Kaelin touched the sarcophagus, his palm flat against the cold marble. He fell in love anyway. And when his mate died screaming in his arms, he understood the true cruelty of the bargain. Sarah moved closer, drawn by the pain in his voice. Every generation since has tried to break it, he continued. We've consulted witches, shamans, seers. We've performed rituals, made sacrifices, begged and bargained and bled. Nothing works. Fenrir's curse is absolute. But the prophecy is hope. He turned to face her, and his gray eyes were haunted. Desperate. Foolish hope passed down by generations who couldn't accept their fate. You don't believe it? I believe what I've seen. His jaw set. I've watched my mother die. My father. My younger sister. My closest friend. Everyone I've ever allowed myself to care about has been taken, and the prophecy did nothing to save them. The grief in his words was staggering. Sarah reached for him instinctively, her hand finding his forearm. The shadows scattered at her touch, hissing like burned creatures. Kaelin stared at the retreating darkness. That's never happened before. His voice was barely audible. In 200 years, nothing has made them retreat. Maybe the prophecy isn't foolish. She tightened her grip. Maybe it's just been waiting for the right person. You're human. I'm something. She looked at the shadows cowering in the chamber's corners, at her own hand glowing faintly against his skin. I don't know what, but I'm something. He covered her hand with his own. If you're the one the prophecy speaks of, he said slowly, then Fenrir will come for you. He won't allow his curse to be broken without a fight. Let him come. You don't understand. Kaelin's grip became urgent. He's not just darkness. He's a god of the old world, cruel, patient, infinite. He's been waiting 800 years for someone to challenge him, and he will destroy you without hesitation. Then why did you bring me here? Why show me any of this? Because you asked. His voice cracked. Because for some reason I cannot fathom. I can't deny you anything you ask for. The confession stole her breath. The chamber fell silent except for the distant drip of water and the flutter of blue flames. The carved wolf watched from the wall, its empty eyes patient and hungry. Kaelin. She stepped closer until barely a breath separated them. How long have you been alone? 200 years. And in all that time, no one has stayed? No one has survived long enough to try. She lifted her free hand and pressed it against his chest. Beneath her palm, his heart beat steady and strong. Proof of life in a man who had accepted death as his only companion. I'm not going anywhere, she said. You should. Probably. She met his gaze without flinching. But I've spent my entire life doing what I should. Running when I should run. Kneeling when I should kneel. I'm tired of should. Something broke in his expression. His hand lifted to her face. Not hovering this time, but touching. His palm cupped her cheek with impossible gentleness, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. You terrify me, he whispered. Good. She leaned into his touch. You should be terrified. A sound echoed through the chamber, deep, rumbling, ancient. The carved wolf's empty eyes flickered with sudden darkness. Kaelin pulled back sharply, shadows surging around him. He knows, he breathed. Fenrir knows you're here. Above them, somewhere in the fortress, wolves began to howl. They emerged from the crypt to chaos. Wolves raced through the corridors in half-shifted forms, their eyes wild with fear. The howling continued, a cascade of voices rising from every corner of the fortress, building into a sound that made Sarah's bones vibrate. Kaelin grabbed her wrist and pulled her against the wall as a group of warriors sprinted past. Marin! His voice cut through the noise like a blade. The silver-haired captain appeared from the shadows, her face tight with controlled panic. The boundary wards are failing. Something is pushing against them from the north. Rogues? Worse. Marin's amber eyes flickered to Sarah. Shadow wolves, Fenrir's hunters. Kaelin went rigid. That's impossible. They haven't manifested in centuries. They're manifesting now. Marin stepped closer, lowering her voice. Whatever happened in that crypt woke something up. The sentries report darkness moving through the forest, not natural darkness. It's eating the light. Sarah's stomach dropped. Because of me. Because I touched him. Because Fenrir knows. Get her to the safe room, Kaelin ordered. No. Sarah pulled her wrist free. I'm not hiding while people die because of me. This isn't negotiable. Neither am I. She met his furious gaze without wavering. You said Fenrir will come for me anyway. Running won't change that. It will buy time. Time for what? For you to fight alone? For more of your people to die protecting someone who's cowering in a locked room? She shook her head. I won't do it. Kaelin's shadows churned violently around his feet. You are the most stubborn. Human, yes. She stepped closer. And this human is staying. Something dangerous flashed in his eyes. Not anger, but something deeper. Something that looked almost like admiration. Marin. He didn't break eye contact with Sarah. Bring her to the War Council. If she wants to be present for her own destruction, I won't stop her. The captain's eyebrows rose, but she nodded. The War Council chamber was buried in the fortress's heart. A circular room with a massive stone table carved with maps and battle positions. A dozen wolves stood around it, their voices overlapping in heated argument. Silence fell when Kaelin entered. Report, he commanded. An older wolf with scars mapping his face spoke first. The shadow wolves number at least 50. They're testing the wards, probing for weakness. We estimate 3 hours before full breach. Evacuation? The tunnels are clear. Non-combatants can reach the southern valley by dawn. Do it! The wolves began to move, but one remained, a younger male with auburn hair and hostile eyes fixed directly on Sarah. This is her fault. His voice dripped venom. The curse was dormant for decades. She arrives and suddenly Fenrir awakens? Careful, Dashel. Kaelin's voice dropped to dangerous registers. No. Dashel stepped forward. We've all served you loyally, my king. We've accepted the curse, accepted our fate. But bringing a human into our midst, allowing her into the crypt, I allowed nothing. She walks where she chooses. Then control her. Dashel's eyes flashed gold. Or give her to Fenrir. Perhaps her blood will satisfy him. The shadows exploded. One moment, Kaelin stood motionless. The next, Dashel was pinned against the wall, darkness coiling around his throat like serpents. The young wolf's feet kicked uselessly, his face purpling. "Speak of her blood again," Kaelin whispered, "and I will show you exactly what I've been restraining for 2 centuries. "My king," Marin started. "Leave us." The council fled. Sarah stood frozen, watching the shadows squeeze tighter around Dashel's throat. The young wolf's struggles grew weaker. "Kaelin." She kept her voice soft. "Stop." The darkness didn't loosen. "Kaelin." She moved closer, reaching for him. "Please." Her hand touched his shoulder. The shadows shattered. Dashel dropped to the ground, gasping, and Kaelin stumbled back as though burned. His gray eyes were wild when they found Sarah's face. "I almost killed him. But you didn't. Because of you." He stared at his own hands like they belonged to a stranger. "Again because of you." Dashel scrambled upright, fleeing the chamber without looking back. The door slammed behind him. They were alone. "He's right." Kaelin's voice was hollow. "You being here changes things, accelerates them. Fenrir has ignored this fortress for generations, and now he has a reason to pay attention," Sarah finished. "Because I'm a threat." "You're not a threat. You're a target." "Maybe I'm both." He turned away, bracing his hands against the war table. His shoulders heaved with ragged breaths. "I can't protect you from a god, Sarah. I can barely protect myself." "Then don't." She approached slowly, standing beside him at the table. "Teach me instead. Whatever is inside me that makes the shadows retreat. Help me understand it. Help me fight." "You don't know what you're asking." "I'm asking for a chance." She placed her hand over his. "I've never had one before. No one ever believed I could be anything but weak. But you look at me like I might actually matter." He raised his head, gray eyes meeting hers. "You matter," he said roughly. "More than you should, more than is safe." "I know." The howling outside intensified. Somewhere beyond the fortress walls, darkness gathered. But in this moment, in this chamber, something stronger than fear took root. The shadow wolves breached the wards at midnight. Sarah watched from the fortress rooftop as darkness poured through the tree line like spilled ink. The creatures weren't entirely solid. They flickered between form and void, their shapes suggesting wolves, but their essence something far older, far hungrier. Kaelin stood beside her, his body coiled with tension. "Stay behind the inner walls," he said without looking at her. "No matter what happens. Kaelin, promise me." His voice cracked on the words. "I cannot fight knowing you're in danger. I cannot." She grabbed his hand. The contact silenced him. His gray eyes found hers, and in them she saw everything he couldn't say. 200 years of loneliness, 2 centuries of watching everyone he loved die. And now this impossible, terrifying hope that she represented. "I promise," she whispered. He lifted their joined hands and pressed his lips to her knuckles. The gesture was achingly tender, devastatingly brief. Then he was gone. She watched him descend into the courtyard where his wolves had gathered. Even from this height, she could feel his power shifting, the shadows responding to his call, wrapping around him like armor. When he raised his head and howled, the sound shook the mountain itself. His pack answered. The battle began. Sarah gripped the stone parapet, her heart slamming against her ribs as she watched chaos unfold below. The shadow wolves moved like nightmares, disappearing and reforming, their claws passing through physical shields to rake flesh beneath. Pack wolves fell screaming, dragged into darkness. But Kaelin fought like a god. His shadows met the enemy's darkness and consumed it. Where he moved, shadow wolves dissolved into nothing. His shifted form was massive, black fur rippling over muscle, gray eyes burning silver in the night, and wherever he struck, the tide turned. Still, there were too many. For every creature he destroyed, 3 more emerged from the tree line. The pack was being overwhelmed. Marin went down with a shadow wolf's teeth in her shoulder. Dashiell, despite his earlier hostility, threw himself over a fallen comrade, taking claws meant for another. I can't just watch. The thought crystallized into certainty. Sarah turned from the parapet and ran. The inner corridors were empty. Everyone who could fight had joined the battle. She raced through hallways she barely knew, following instinct toward the courtyard gates. The shadows retreat from me. Maybe I can help. She burst through the main doors into hell. The noise was overwhelming. Snarls, screams, the wet sound of tearing flesh. The smell of blood hung thick in the air. A shadow wolf materialized directly in her path, its void-filled eyes fixing on her with predatory hunger. It lunged. Sarah threw up her hands instinctively. Light exploded from her palms. The shadow wolf shrieked, a sound like tearing metal, and dissolved into wisps of darkness that scattered on the wind. Sarah stared at her hands, at the faint golden glow fading from her skin. What? Sierra! Kalen's roar cut through the battlefield noise. She looked up to find him fighting toward her, his wolf form shredding through enemies with desperate fury. But he was too far. And she was surrounded. 3 shadow wolves circled her, their forms solidifying with eager menace. They moved in coordinated patterns, cutting off escape routes. Think. Think. She pressed her palms together and focused on that spark of light, wherever it had come from. Her chest burned, her vision blurred. Something ancient and powerful stirred in her blood. Please! The light erupted. It burst from her like a shockwave, golden and blinding. Sweeping across the courtyard in an expanding ring. Every shadow wolf it touched screamed and died. The darkness recoiled, fleeing toward the tree line. Sarah collapsed. Her knees hit the blood-stained ground. Her hands shook. Her entire body felt hollow, emptied of something vital. Arms caught her before she fell completely. Kalen shifted back to human form, naked and covered in blood, cradled her against his chest. His gray eyes were wild with terror. What did you do? His voice was hoarse. Sarah, what did you do? I don't know. Her words slurred. The light. It was inside me. You're burning up. His hand pressed against her forehead. Your body can't handle this kind of power. You're human. Am I? She laughed weakly. I'm starting to wonder. The battlefield had fallen silent. The remaining shadow wolves had fled. Pack members stood frozen, staring at the human woman who had just turned the tide of battle with golden light. The prophecy. Marin limped forward, her wounded shoulder hastily bandaged. The outsider who will break the curse. She's not just human, she's something more. She's dying. Kalen's voice broke. She used too much. Sarah felt the truth of his words. Her heart stuttered irregularly. Her vision darkened at the edges. Kalen. She reached for his face, her fingers barely brushing his jaw. I saw something. When the light came, I saw him. Saw who? Fenrir. Her eyes fluttered. He's afraid. He's afraid of what I am. What are you? She smiled faintly. The opposite of shadow. Her voice faded to a whisper. The thing he tried to destroy 800 years ago. The light he couldn't extinguish. Her eyes closed. Sarah. Kalen shook her gently. Sarah. She didn't respond. He gathered her limp form against his chest and howled. Not a battle cry, not a victory song, but something raw and broken. The sound echoed across the blood-soaked courtyard. For the first time in 200 years, the Alpha King wept. Sarah drifted in golden darkness. She wasn't unconscious, not truly. She existed somewhere between, suspended in a warm void that pulsed with soft light. Voices reached her occasionally, muffled and distant like sounds heard underwater. Kaylin's voice came most often. "Don't leave me. Please. I've only just found you. The healers say your body is adapting, changing. They don't understand what you're becoming. I never believed the prophecy. Never allowed myself to hope. But you made me believe again." She wanted to answer him. Wanted to open her eyes and tell him she was still fighting. But her body refused to obey. So she drifted. And in the drifting, she dreamed. The dreamscape materialized around her. A meadow bathed in eternal twilight, neither day nor night. Wildflowers swayed in a breeze she couldn't feel. A silver river cut through the landscape, its waters glowing faintly. A woman stood beside the river. She was beautiful in an ancient way, ageless features, hair the color of starlight, eyes that held galaxies. Her dress was simple white linen, but light emanated from her skin as though she'd swallowed the sun. "Hello, daughter." Her voice resonated like bells. Sarah's dream self approached cautiously. "Who are you?" "I am Solara." The woman smiled gently. "The first light. The balance to Fenrir's darkness." "A goddess?" "Once, before your kind forgot us. Before shadow grew strong enough to eclipse our memory." Solara extended her hand. "Come, walk with me." They moved along the river's edge. The water sang soft melodies as it flowed. 800 years ago, Solara began. Fenrir and I existed in balance, light and dark, neither stronger, neither weaker. But he grew jealous of humanity, their warmth, their connections, their capacity for love. He wanted to corrupt it. The curse. Yes. Sadness flickered across the goddess's face. He tricked a foolish alpha into accepting poisoned power. In exchange, Fenrir fed on every love that bloodline produced. Each death made him stronger. "And you couldn't stop him?" "I tried." Solara's voice hardened. "We battled for decades. I managed to seed one possibility, a prophecy, a hope, before he nearly destroyed me. I scattered myself into fragments, hiding pieces of my essence in human bloodlines where he couldn't find them. Understanding dawned slowly. I'm one of those fragments. You're the last one." Solara stopped, turning to face Sarah fully. "Every other vessel was found and extinguished. You survived because you were born without a wolf, invisible to supernatural senses. Unremarkable. Safe. I was never unremarkable." Sarah's voice sharpened. "I was broken. Failed. My entire life I was told I was less than everyone around me. You were protected." Solara cupped Sarah's face in luminous hands. "Your human shell kept you hidden until the moment you were needed most. Until you found him. Kaylin. The curse's strongest victim. The king who has suffered longest." The goddess's eyes softened. "Do you understand now? You weren't brought together by accident. Fate wove your paths toward each other across centuries." Sarah's throat tightened. "He thinks I'm dying. You're transforming. The power you unleashed cracked your human limitations. When you wake, you'll be something new, neither fully human nor wolf, but something older. Something that can stand against Fenrir directly." "And if I can't? If I fail?" Solara's expression grew solemn. "Then darkness wins. Fenrir consumes the Voss bloodline entirely, and grows strong enough to spread his curse beyond one family. Every bond, every love, every connection between beings, he will poison them all." The weight of it pressed against Sarah's chest. "I'm just one person. You're never just one person when someone believes in you." Solara began to fade, her form dissolving into golden motes. "He's waiting for you, daughter. He's been holding your hand for 3 days, refusing food, refusing sleep. Don't make him wait longer." "How do I wake up?" "Choose to." The goddess smiled one final time. "Choose him." The dreamscape shattered. Sarah gasped awake. Candlelight flickered across an unfamiliar ceiling, vaulted stone carved with protective symbols. She lay in a massive bed draped with dark furs, her body weak but whole. And beside her, slumped in a chair with her hand clutched in both of his, was Kalen. He looked terrible. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His hair was tangled, his jaw rough with stubble. His clothes were the same blood-stained garments from the battle. But he was here. Kalen. Her voice emerged as a rasp. His eyes flew open. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then he was on the bed beside her, gathering her against his chest with desperate gentleness. "You're awake." His voice shattered. "Sarah, Sarah." He kept repeating her name like a prayer. She buried her face against his neck, inhaling his scent, pine and smoke and something uniquely him. Her fingers clutched his shirt. "I saw her," she whispered. "Solara, I know what I am now." He pulled back just enough to see her face. His gray eyes were wet. "What are you?" "The light that can break your curse." She touched his cheek, wiping away a tear he probably didn't know he'd shed. "The goddess hid herself inside my bloodline. I'm her last vessel." "A goddess?" He laughed brokenly. Of course you are." "Does that change things?" "Nothing changes what I feel." He pressed his forehead against hers. "Nothing in this world or any other." "Kalen." She breathed his name into the space between them. "I choose you." His breath caught. "What?" "Whatever comes next. Fenrir, the curse, the war. I choose you." He kissed her. The kiss lasted only seconds. A crash shook the fortress. Deep, resonant, wrong. The candles extinguished simultaneously, plunging the chamber into darkness broken only by moonlight streaming through tall windows. Kalen pulled back, his body going rigid. "He's here." Sarah felt it too. A pressure against her newly awakened senses, ancient, malevolent, vast. It pressed against her consciousness like a thumb against a bruise. Fenrir had come. "Stay here." Kalen was already moving, shadows gathering around him like armor. "No." She threw off the furs and stood on unsteady legs. "I'm the one he wants. I'm the one who has to face him. You nearly died 3 days ago. And I woke up stronger." She reached for him, gripping his arm. "You can't fight a god, Kalen. Not alone. Not even you." Another crash. Closer. The stones beneath their feet trembled. Kalen's jaw worked. She watched him war with himself, the instinct to protect battling against the knowledge that she was right. "Together," he finally said. "We face him together. Together." They moved through corridors filled with chaos. Pack members fled in every direction, their howls carrying notes of primal terror. The shadows along the walls writhed independently, reaching for anyone who passed. The throne room doors hung broken from their hinges. Inside was darkness made manifest. Fenrir didn't look like a wolf. He looked like the absence of everything, a void shaped vaguely like a man, towering 12 feet tall, his form constantly shifting between solid and smoke. Where his eyes should have been, 2 points of absolute blackness stared out. Where his mouth opened, stars died. "Little vessel." His voice was everywhere and nowhere. "You shouldn't have woken." Sarah stepped forward despite every instinct screaming retreat. "You're afraid of me." The void rippled. Amusement or anger. Impossible to tell. Afraid? Of a fragment? Of a spark? Fenrir moved closer and reality bent around him. "I devoured Solara's power centuries ago. You carry nothing but her memory." "Then why are you here?" She kept her voice steady. "Why come yourself instead of sending more shadow wolves?" The god paused. Clever creature. Something like respect colored his tone. "You understand more than expected. I understand that you've grown comfortable." Sarah's hands began to glow, faintly, flickeringly. 800 years of feeding on one bloodline. 800 years of corrupted love. You're not a god anymore. You're a parasite. The darkness exploded. Tendrils of shadow lashed toward her, but Kalen was faster. He intercepted them with his own darkness, the two forces colliding in eruptions of void and fury. "Run!" Kalen shouted, struggling against the god's assault. Sarah didn't run. Instead, she closed her eyes and reached inward, past the fear, past the doubt, past 23 years of being told she was nothing. She reached for the light Solara had planted in her blood, and she found it. Golden fire erupted from her skin. Fenrir screamed, a sound that cracked the throne room's remaining windows. The shadows recoiled, burning where light touched them. Impossible! The god's form destabilized. She was destroyed. I felt her die. You felt her hide. Sarah's voice resonated with power that wasn't entirely hers. She scattered herself where you couldn't find her, into human blood, into unremarkable girls born without wolves. I will consume you. Fenrir's form reconstituted, larger now, angrier. I will drain every drop of light from your soul. Try. They collided. Light and darkness met in a cataclysm that shook the mountain. Sarah felt herself being torn apart, her consciousness fragmenting, her body burning. Fenrir was old, powerful, fed by centuries of stolen love. But she had something he didn't. She had something to fight for. Kalen. His name anchored her. His face filled her mind. Those gray eyes, that rare smile. The way he'd kissed her like she was the answer to every question he'd ever asked. I choose you. The light intensified. Fenrir screamed again as golden flames ate through his shadows. He clawed at her consciousness, trying to find purchase, but she was slipping through his grasp like water through fingers. This isn't over. The god's form began dissolving. The curse remains. The bond endures. Then I'll break it. She pushed everything she had into one final burst. The throne room exploded in white. When the light faded, Sarah lay in a crater of scorched stone. Her body felt simultaneously destroyed and remade. Every cell hummed with residual power. Her vision swam with afterimages of golden fire. Sarah. Kalen's face appeared above her, bloody and beautiful. Sarah, can you hear me? Is he gone? Gone. Retreated. Kalen gathered her against him, his hands shaking. You drove him back. You actually drove back a god. Not defeated. She struggled to speak through exhaustion. He said the curse remains. Shh. He pressed his lips to her forehead. Rest now. Whatever comes next, we face it together. Around them, the throne room lay in ruins. Pack members emerged from hiding places, staring at the destruction with shell-shocked expressions. Marin approached slowly, her injured arm bound in a sling. My king! Her voice was hoarse. The shadow wolves have vanished. The darkness in the forest. It's gone. Kalen nodded without releasing Sarah. For now. For now, Marin agreed. But she wounded him. I've never seen anything wound him. Sarah felt consciousness slipping away. Not death this time, just exhaustion claiming what was owed. But before darkness took her, she heard Kalen's voice, soft against her ear. My mate. The word trembled. My light. She smiled, and let herself fall. 1 month later, the garden bloomed. Sarah stood at its center, barefoot on grass that had been frozen dirt weeks ago. Roses climbed the restored fountain, red and white and gold, their petals catching the morning light. Wildflowers carpeted the ground in impossible colors. A cherry tree had sprouted near the eastern wall, already heavy with blossoms. Life had returned to the fortress, not just to the garden. The shadows that once haunted every corridor had retreated, leaving behind ordinary darkness that behaved as darkness should. The wolves walked easier, laughed louder, spoke without the constant undercurrent of dread that had defined generations. The curse wasn't broken, not completely. Fenrir still existed somewhere in the void between worlds, licking his wounds and plotting revenge. But his grip on the Voss bloodline had loosened. For the first time in 800 years, love didn't automatically mean death. "You're up early." Sarah turned to find Kaelin approaching through the garden gate. He looked different now, softer somehow. The permanent tension had eased from his shoulders. His gray eyes held warmth instead of haunted distance. "I couldn't sleep." She smiled. "Too much to think about." He stopped beside her, his hand finding hers automatically. They touched constantly now. Small contact, constant reassurance that the other was real. "Second thoughts? About what?" "Today." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "The ceremony. Becoming my Luna officially." "No second thoughts." She squeezed his hand. "Unless you're having them." "I've waited 200 years for you." He pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "I would wait 200 more." They stood together, watching the sun rise over the mountains. The light painted everything gold. The flowers, the stones, the water dancing in the restored fountain. "My father sent another letter," Sarah said quietly. Kaelin's arms tightened slightly. "What did he want?" "Forgiveness? Explanation?" "He claims he didn't know what Victor was truly like." She paused. "He wants to attend today." "Do you want him there?" The question held no judgment. Kaelin had made it clear from the beginning. Her choices were hers alone. He would support whatever she decided. "No." The word came easier than expected. Maybe someday, but not today. Today is about moving forward, not dragging the past behind us. He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Then forward it is." The ceremony took place at sunset. Not in the throne room, that was still being rebuilt, but in the garden itself, surrounded by the impossible flowers that Sarah's presence had coaxed from dead soil. Pack members filled every available space, their faces lit by hundreds of floating candles. Sarah wore white again, but this dress was nothing like the heavy ceremonial gown from Victor's altar. This one was simple, flowing silk that moved like water, embroidered with golden thread that matched the light living beneath her skin. She walked alone through the crowd. No one gave her away. No treaty demanded her presence. She came to Kaelin of her own free will, her own choice, her own heart. He waited beside the fountain, dressed in black that made his gray eyes luminous. When he saw her approaching, his breath caught audibly. "Beautiful." The word escaped him like a prayer. She took her place beside him. Marin officiated, her shoulder fully healed now, her amber eyes suspiciously bright. The words she spoke were old, traditional, but they held new meaning tonight. "Do you, Kaelin Voss, Alpha King of the 7 territories, accept this woman as your mate? Do you pledge your protection, your loyalty, your heart for as long as you both shall live?" "I do." His voice resonated through the garden. "Longer, if fate allows." Marin turned to Sarah. "Do you, Sarah Valdrin, vessel of Solara's light, accept this man as your mate? Do you pledge your protection, your loyalty, your heart for as long as you both shall live?" Sarah looked at Kaelin. Really looked. She saw the lonely boy who'd watched his mother die. The young man who'd learned to stop loving because loving meant loss. The king who'd ruled with iron distance because closeness killed. And she saw who he was becoming, who they were becoming together. "I do." Kaelin produced a ring, not silver or gold, but something that seemed woven from solidified moonlight. It slipped onto her finger perfectly, warming against her skin. "With this ring, I bind myself to you." His voice dropped to something intimate despite the crowd. "Not because fate demands it, not because prophecy ordained it, because I choose you, Sarah. Every day, every moment, for whatever eternity were granted." Tears slipped down her cheeks. She didn't have a ring for him. Human customs were different. Instead, she pressed her hand against his chest, over his heart, and let her light flow into him. He gasped. Golden warmth spread beneath his skin, visible as a soft glow that pulsed once, twice, then settled into something permanent. A mark. A bond deeper than any ring could represent. "Now we're connected," she whispered. "My light in your shadows. Always." Kaelin kissed her. The crowd erupted in howls of celebration, joyous, wild, free. Wolves shifted and danced beneath the rising moon. The candles flickered in approval. Even the flowers seemed to lean toward the newly bonded pair. When they finally broke apart, Kaelin's eyes were wet. "I love you." The words came raw, unpracticed. "I didn't think I remembered how, but I love you." Sarah smiled, bright, unguarded, full of the light she carried. "I love you too." She cupped his face in her hands. "And I'm not going anywhere. Not ever." Above them, the moon rose full and silver, and for the first time in 800 years, its light felt like a blessing instead of a curse.